Welcome, I'm Ginny Hallam of Halborns and you're listening to our 10 Minutes with Sessions. Halborns are part of the brilliant Empowering People group who support with tech-enabled people solutions, and part of that support are these 10-minute with sessions. This is the last session in our series focusing on what makes a great employment contract. So we've covered compliance, we've covered lots about commerciality, and today is all about how to make your contracts of employment as contemporary as possible. And I'm delighted to welcome back Rena Christou. If there's one person that knows what makes a great contract, it's Rena. I think I'm right in saying, Rena, aren't I, that you've had one of your employment contracts and policies ranked in the top 10 of employment contracts nationally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I might be a little bit biased, but just to say we've saved the best till last.
Fantastic. Well, no pressure then. You've got 10 minutes. Should we get going?
Yeah, let's do it.
Fantastic. So we talk about contemporary contracts, but what does that really mean? Explain to us what you view as being a really contemporary contract.
Yeah, I think to kind of give that the best footing, it's important to reflect on what we've had in place before. So employment contracts have always been really focused on being something for compliance purposes. So you've got to have them in place legally. And I think as part of that, they have really focused on that element of it. So in terms of making sure that you've got all the T's and C's that you need to have in there to tick the box. And it's true, they are a legal requirement and they're great for protecting what matters most. And we've covered that in some of the previous sessions about kind of how we can do that in protecting people, know-how and relationships. But a contemporary contract kind of covers that off, but in a way that is accessible, user-friendly and engaging. And I think that's been the missing piece, that engaging piece. So for me, that's what really makes a contract engaging. And it might sound like, why bother in terms of that? But fundamentally, the employment contract is usually the first thing that somebody new, so a new starter, will experience. It's the first thing they'll receive. It's the first impression that you make as an organisation. And it's important that you want to make the right impression. So actually, taking that step back and thinking, does this document really reflect the business, our values, the culture that we have? And historically, that just hasn't been the case. So actually, what they've really been focused on a lot of the times is, what are all the reasons that we can dismiss you, and what are the expectations that we have of you? But thankfully, that's moving on, and that's where we're seeing these contemporary contracts coming through to make sure that they are genuinely engaging.
Yeah, and that engagement piece is such an important part of the whole journey of employment, isn't it? That, as you say, if you can get people's interest in the documents that they're receiving at the start of their employment, which traditionally would have been seen as being quite dull documents, then that continues the great recruitment, it continues the great onboarding, and hopefully that continues throughout the journey of their employment. And in terms of making an employment contract contemporary, I mean, that word contemporary is quite amorphous, isn't it? So can you give kind of 3 hints and tips on how it is that our viewers can make their employment contracts much more engaging, much more contemporary?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a really obvious one for me is keeping them simple. So there's lots of statistics out there to show how little people read employment contracts. So a lot of effort goes into drafting them, but actually I think around 20% of individuals actually read through their contracts. And I do wonder whether that's predominantly HR and people team folk in the first place. So for me, keeping it simple has got to be the priority, because you actually want people to read them. And as part of that, in terms of keeping it simple, no one has got the time or the inclination, quite frankly, to read something that is incredibly lengthy and complicated. So keeping it short and sweet to make sure that someone can pick it up, flick through it easily, and see clearly what terms and conditions are in there. So what's expected of them and what they can expect in return is got to be the first one. The second thing that I would focus on is keeping them straight talking. So again, there can be a real kind of misconception that you have to put belt and braces in there and refer to things in the way that you would in traditional legal documents, but actually there's absolutely no reason to do that. So keeping them straight talking so that someone again can easily work out what's what within the terms and conditions means that A, you're likely to reduce the queries that you'll get, which has got to be a good thing. And it'll also save you time in the long run in terms of their application. So you've got no ambiguity or little ambiguity in terms of, what the terms are, and as a result you should reduce the amount of conflicts that arise, because if you're clear from the get-go on both sides about what the terms and conditions of the employment are, then it means that you're all kind of heading in the right direction, and that should limit any potential conflict. And then the third one, I guess I would say, and a lot of these overlap, right? So although we're saying kind of these are the top three areas that I'd focus on, a lot of these do overlap, and the third one has to be making them user friendly, which I know kind of goes hand in hand with the other two that we've mentioned. But what I mean by that is thinking about the language that you're using. So we talked about making them engaging. So often I still see contracts referring to the company and the employee, and it's not personal, it's not engaging, it feels like an us and them from the get-go, which I'm sure if we speak to most of these big businesses, they would say that's absolutely not what we're about, that's not our culture. And it's funny that the documents just don't reflect that at all. So moving away from language like that, stripping out legal jargon, I'd say aside of perhaps us, and even then it's questionable, nobody is interested in knowing what legislation something stems from. They don't need to know the piece of law that it came from. They just need to know, right, practically, what do I need to do in practice here? And that's what we need to set out. So there should be no reference to any complicated laws or any legal jargon in that respect. So no hithertos or whereof or anything else that's equally lengthy and unnecessary. And just create a context for what you're saying as well. So again, coming back to this point of being user friendly, there are clauses within employment contracts that are what I would describe as heavier. So if you think about, probationary periods, for example, it's not the nicest of clauses, because it feels like you're already talking about things not working out. But it's fine to have a probation period clause in there, but explain it differently. So for example, we talk about early days within our documents, don't we? So instead of talking about probation period, which sounds a little bit like you've spent some time in prison or about to, we talk about early days, talking about the fact that you're likely to have questions. We want you to succeed, we want to set you up to succeed. So that's why we have this period within the early days to kind of give you the best footing to do that and to support you to do that. That's a very different context to saying the same thing, but in a completely different way, where actually somebody's perceiving it as a supportive opportunity, a supportive window, as opposed to we're going to fast track you out if it's not working. Another example that I would give is in respect of promises that you tend to have outlined within an employment contract, which you'll often see referred to as warranties. And again, that's not very user-friendly language, but if you need people to give you a promise about something from the get-go when they're entering into the relationship, so a common one would be that somebody promises that they'll provide 2 satisfactory references. Again, just think about how you word that. So it's very different to say your employment is subject to 2 satisfactory references, as opposed to we want to hear how great you are from someone else, and that's why your employment, we ask you to provide 2 acceptable references before you start with us, or words to that effect. So you can say the same thing, but in a much more user-friendly tone.
No, thank you for bringing that to life, because it's not as easy to say put it in a straight talking language, isn't it? But actually those examples that you've given have really given some insight as to what that might look like, so hopefully helpful for our viewers. And one more question for you, if that's okay. So contracts come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? And as employment lawyers, we see the good, the bad, and the indifferent. So what would be your preference when you're creating an employment contract in terms of format? Is there a set format that we should all be using? What are your views?
Yeah, so there's no set format that we need to use. So you can have them in, as you say, in any shape or size that you like. But coming back to this point of keeping them short and sweet is really, really important and key. And also, I always think that what are the clauses that you really want to know when you're starting somewhere new? So kick off with those. Do you want to have a summary sheet at the front, for example, that says the things that you really want to know about working with us, where you summarize those key terms and conditions? You don't have to do it in that way. You can break it down really easily and clearly in the structure of your employment contract. But even something as basic as not starting off the employment contract with how you're going to part ways. Again, think about having the notice provision towards, and kind of any post-termination obligations towards the back end of the employment contract, so that it is a really warm welcome when you're turning the page. And you can be as creative as you like with employment contracts. So if I think about some of the fun ones that we've done recently, yes, there are set terms and conditions that you need to have outlined within them, so we've covered that, but actually you can visually make them look and feel however you want to. So for example, there's a couple that spring to mind recently, an owner's manual for a motor retail client that we did, that's a little bit like an old Haynes manual, so you can flick through easily, and again, it's engaging. Or one that we've done recently for a music licensing company, whose contract kicks off with "drum roll please," and you can imagine the rest. So as I say, you can be as creative as you like with them. You can have them in physical format or virtual. You can have video messages to kick them off from the get-go. There is so much that you can do with employment contracts, providing that you've still got those minimum compliance terms and conditions contained within them.
And for those that have got marketing teams and PR teams, I mean, that's what they do, isn't it? They bring to life with with imagery, with structure, with formats, some documents all the time. So bring in other teams' expertise to help once you've got the kind of fundamentals that you were talking about with regards to language in place.
Absolutely.
Well, fantastic as usual. Thank you so much. For our viewers, if you've loved this series, if you're now thinking about your employment contracts and how you might tackle a review, perhaps an update, you might want to access our new diagnostic tool that we've developed that is on our website. If you want to get free insight into the health of your employment contracts, you can use that automated 10-point diagnostic tool to get a health score. You can access the diagnostic tool through our website, as I've just said, and you'll also find the link if you need it in the video description below. And if you're interested in some further personal and expert support from our lawyers, with a view to either a full review, a redraft, an update of your existing contracts or policies, then we have got plenty of solutions to support, and details are on the screen. So please do get in touch, and we can ensure that we discuss your requirements and recommend the best solution to meet with your aims and budget. That's all for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Rena, and enjoy the rest of your day.